So Genesis 36. Got the whole contents here on this one side, and the side of the notes that are all have the multicolored boxes and stuff on them. So this is maybe one of the most interesting, or you might say bewildering, chapters in the Bible, I think, for a lot of people. It's not interesting because it's full of amazing details and you're on the edge of your seat, that's for sure. It's genealogies, right? What could be more thrilling than genealogies? Just about everything, right? Could be, and is. So it sort of tests us, right? People ask, what's the purpose of a chapter like this in the Bible? And I read one guy said it's to test our resolve to read the Bible. It's like, yeah, it's kind of functions that way sometimes, right? Yeah, it's this speed bump, so to speak, right? Are you going to keep going, or are you going to turn back? One famous commentator, I was talking to Stan the other day. He writes in his commentaries, kind of through the Bible. He'll give these. He'll give his comments, and then he'll give kind of homiletical suggestions, which are like, hey, these are things maybe that you have to think about preaching from this sort of a chapter. And he'll even include notes on some chapters like, hey, this is not a chapter, or this portion of the chapter would be really difficult to get into. Maybe you wouldn't normally teach through this. And he doesn't include anything on this chapter at all. And another guy was commenting on that and said, maybe it's because he assumes no one in their right mind would ever preach from this chapter. So they laid down the gauntlet, so here we are, right? So we're working through Genesis, and I don't feel it right at all to skip through the chapter. I promise you there are more things to get out of this than just to say we did it, right? There are some important things here, and I want to bring some of those things out. Most of those things will come out at the end on the back, and some of these questions and things that I have and I give some answers to. And they're significant enough and concise enough, I thought, again, just to print them out here, and you could just take it with you and have it. We've already prayed for our time together today in the Word, so I don't feel like there's a new, fresh need to do that. So what I'd like to do is just to jump in and begin to read through this and explain it as we go, and highlight some things. And then we'll deal with questions and issues that come up on the backside. So here we are. To begin with, remember, before we get reading these told out sections in Genesis, there are a total, I believe, of 11 of them. And this told out section, it's each time, it's in the ESV, it begins with, these are the generations of Esau. And that phrase, these are the generations of, is this new section that begins. And when it's said that way, it's going to tell us basically what's come from that person or what's come from that state of things. Remember in Genesis chapter 2, we have that same thing. These are the generations of the heaven and earth in the day that the Lord God created the earth and the heavens. And so it's very much what became of that, and you begin to work your way through that. And so these sections are self-contained units, and they all have their own individual purposes. This section here, we have just finished this told out section of Isaac, and he's passed away, and then his two sons, Jacob and Esau, are dealt with. And in chapter 36, we deal with Esau. He was not the chosen son, the one who, remember, he had walked his way right out of the family of promise willfully. That was predicted about him as well, but it was, in fact, something he did and chose to do. And then in chapter 37, verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. We pick up with the other son, Jacob, and things flow and follow out of him through the rest of Genesis, what became of Jacob and his descendants. So this is where we are. We're kind of cleaning things up. Before we get to deal with Jacob and his descendants, which is where the promise of God has passed through, we need to finish things with Esau, not just leave him out there hanging. And so that's kind of what this is. It's kind of tidying things up, cleaning up what's happened with Esau, answering questions, giving us information, giving the people of Israel information. And that's what this section is all about. So verse 1, these are the generations of Esau, that is Edom. Esau took his wives from the Canaanites, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of the son, rather, of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. And Adah bore to Esau Eliphaz, Basemath bore Reuel, and Oholibamah bore Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Now, we could stop there just for a minute. These are listing, I would say, at least the major wives of Esau and their sons that were born in Canaan. That's important to note. Why is this list? Why does it stop here? These are the sons he had that were born to him in Canaan. So while he was still in Canaan, remember he later moved to Seir, which we're getting ready to read about. He moves to Seir, which is another area, also named after a guy who was pretty prominent at the time. We'll read more about him later. But he left the land of promise. He left Canaan and went to this other place. But before he left, he had these three wives, and they had all born to him these particular sons. He had 5 sons: Eliphaz, Reuel, Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. The names aren't important to us, but they're mentioned because they had names like most people do, right? These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Now then, it moves on in verses 6 through 8 and gives us a reason for Esau to leave Canaan. Why did he leave? Verse 6, Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, his livestock, all his beasts, and all his property that he had gained and had acquired in the land of Canaan. He went into a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. The land and their sojournings could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. That's the second time we've been told that. Remember in verse 1, these are the generations of Esau, that is Edom. Now we're told Esau is Edom. Kind of repetitive, that'll come out again and again. But for now, let's just deal with these 3 verses that we have, 6, 7, and 8. Esau took his wives, we've read about them, his sons, we've read about them, his daughters haven't been mentioned. Very often in genealogies, the daughters are not mentioned, right? And there's reasons for that. It's not because it's a sexist book. It's because historical records were kept in that way. Generally, you'd go through generally the oldest son, but generally through the sons, and generations you would pass down in that way. It would be those sons that were leaders of the clan or leaders of the tribe or leaders of their region, whatever it would be, those prominent names would feature. And Esau had 5 sons who were all prominent as things go on, or we might say in the world's eyes, successful men, leaders among men. Now he took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his households. That would be slaves, servants, contracted workers, all sorts of different people that he would have with him. He took them as well, and his livestock, right? All his beasts and all his property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan, everything. He moved and he meant to never come back, right? It wasn't the kind of move you do, right? As a college student, maybe you graduate high school and you go off to college and you move, but you take some things with you because your home base is still kind of with your parents, right? And you're going to come back, right? You've got some things at the house or whatever, but you go off to school, and then over summer break, you actually expect them to still have a bed for you. But you've moved, but you've not moved, right? This is not what happened. He moved, and he meant to never come back. He's out of there. He's closing the book on Canaan, and he's moving somewhere else. Now, he went into a land away from his brother Jacob, and it's curious that it's described that way, because remember Jacob, we remember Esau was in the land and was ready to kill Jacob. Jacob fled for his life and didn't come back for like 20 years. And when Jacob gets back, Esau's already in Seir. He's already moved out of Canaan. So it's an odd way of saying things that he moved away from his brother Jacob. Verse 7, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. That happened with someone else too, you might remember. Remember Abram and Lot? Their possessions were too great. They started having controversy between their workers. They said, we're going to split up because our possessions are too great for this area where we're trying to live. And so they split up. And Lot chose the better land, and he said, I'm going to go live out here. Interestingly, Esau moves out into a similar area, kind of the same geographic area, not exactly the same, but the same region. Moves out of Canaan into that area. That's not a good thing for him. But the reason he leaves, their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. And I think the idea is, in Esau's mind, Jacob is left. He's there living in Canaan, near his parents. And everything that his dad has, and all the success that his dad has, he knows now belongs to Jacob. And it's getting hard to live together, to kind of confine. And he's like, I'm just leaving. There's nothing for me here. And we're running into conflict because there's so much that I have and so much that he has. I'm just going to go. And he leaves. And then when Jacob returns, he finds that Esau is in Seir. Right? So I think that's the way this works out. And so he went into a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. The land of their sojournings could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. So there he goes, and he's off there. He's settled out there. Now then, these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. And you think, wait a minute. We just read, these are the generations of Esau, that is Edom, in verse 1, and now we're going to read it again. This would be the only time in all of Genesis where this sort of thing is repeated like this. These are the generations of Esau. 8 verses later, these are the generations of Esau. Remember, we talked about these told out sections. It's a really strange situation here. Really strange. Many scholars, and I'm included in this group, not as a scholar, but as someone who believes this, but that this was inserted in here. Now, before you go saying, well, wait a minute, we're saying the Bible has changed and stuff, remember, we have said from the beginning, the books of Moses, these 5 books, were written by Moses, and then were later, by scribes in Israel, added to. And there were plain places we had read in the beginning of our Genesis study where it's obvious. I mean, when you're reporting about where Moses' body, what happened to his body after he died, like, I know he's a prophet, but it doesn't read that way. And then you read about things where it's like, and this still bears that name even to this day, after the people of Israel have come into the land. Well, Moses wasn't alive when they got into the land. So there's no Christian who thinks that Moses wrote every word in these books. So the question is, have we now come to one of those places that was later brought in? And I think so. And we'll argue for that in here a little bit. But so just to say, I think that's what's happening here. But notice also there is a curious difference in the way things are described. Verse 1, these are the generations of Esau, that is Edom. Verse 9, these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. That reads different. And for us, it's mostly just repetitive. And we're going to read on, and we're going to say, well, we've read most of this already. What's the deal? Well, the first list was all his sons that were born to him in Canaan. Now we're talking about these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. Now we're talking about when he moved to Seir, what became of Esau and his sons and all that they did in that land. And we want to know about the Edomites, because there are a people called Edomites who are all not ethnically from Esau. And yet the region is known as Edom. Does this make sense? So it's all kind of has his name. They're the ones in control, but they didn't used to be. There's a time when Esau and his sons, Esau whose name Edom, and his sons moved to this place. And then now what became of them? And so it's kind of a different question that we're asking. So we have here in verses 10 through 14, just what I have described on the left, an expanded list of Esau's sons from his major wives. It's not just those born in Canaan. Remember earlier we had 5 sons total. Now let's read. These are the names, and I'll just count them. These are the names of Esau's sons. Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau. Reuel, the son of Basemath, the wife of Esau. The sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatan, and Kenaz. Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek, that's 8 now, to Eliphaz. These are the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. These are the sons of Reuel: Nahath, Zerah, Shema, Mizah. These are the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. These are the sons of Oholibamah's daughter, Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon, Esau's wife. She bore to Esau Jeush, Jalam, Korah. We got 15 names now, 15 sons. It's 2 generations, but 15 names. Now we know how these genealogies work. They're not necessarily just exactly 2 generations. Sometimes a grandson is described as a son, especially when we're talking about these multi-generational sort of lists. Now, so these are his sons, and I think these are likely, though, in this case, sons and grandsons. But let's look then, the next section. These are chiefs from Esau's descendants in the land of Edom. Some sort of a chief. These are the chiefs of the sons of Esau. The list is basically the same, except for there's some insertions here. There's some changes a little bit. The sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn of Esau, the chiefs: Teman, Omar, Zepho, Kenaz. Okay, those are all the exact same sons that were listed earlier. Those all sons became chiefs. They were prominent men in Seir. Korah, Gatam, Amalek, same thing. These are all his sons. Even Amalek was included, who was born to Eliphaz by this concubine, Timnah. These are the chiefs of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. These are the sons of Adah. These are the sons of Reuel. This is this other son that he had, who was born to him by Basemath. The chiefs Nahath, Zerah, Shema, and Mizah. These are the chiefs of Reuel in the land of Edom. Again, similar. These are the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. These are the sons of Oholibamah. Now, this is Esau's wife. The other chiefs were all Esau's grandsons. These chiefs from this woman, the ones that became chiefs, are his immediate sons: Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the chiefs born to Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, Esau's wife. So there, it's not the grandsons that became the chiefs, it's just the sons. Also, there was one other in this list, and I forgot to mention this, in verse 16 begins with the name Korah. That's a different Korah that's in verse 18, and that Korah was not mentioned as one of his sons earlier. Verses 10 through 14, Korah is not mentioned as one of his sons, or one of his grandsons, but here it is mentioned as a chief from Esau's descendants in the land of Edom. So we just insert another name. Now, we don't know, how is he related? He's listed as one of his sons, but he's not listed in the listing specifically of his sons, but now he's a chief from his sons. It's in the land of Edom. It's kind of a strange thing. What's going on? Well, let's at least acknowledge, verse 10 says these are the names of Esau's sons. Verse 15 says these are the chiefs of the sons of Esau. So there are different lists. However much overlapping there might be, there are different questions that different objectives that each one of these lists has. And so we can't be surprised if some of the names are different. You and I would just say, well, would you just print out the family tree for me? And I won't ask any more questions. But these lists all function in different ways. And so that's sort of what's happening here. Now, I have here off to the side there in parentheses on the bottom left of that section, A7, B4, C3. That's just the sons that are mentioned and their descendants. How many are mentioned? 7, then 4, then 3. A, B, and C just stand, it's like algebra, it just stands for the first and the second and the third. It's not I should have put their initials, but I didn't. Or their first initial or whatever. But I don't know what their last name would be, right? Edom, maybe? I don't know. Eliphaz, Edom? I don't know what you'd say. Now, next section. Okay, so let's look at this, though. For that first section, verses 9 through 19 that we looked at, you had a list of Esau's sons, and then you had a list of the chiefs from his sons. Now we're going to have the sons of Seir, the Horite, and then chiefs from the Horites in the land of Seir. Now, when Esau left and went to this land over here outside of Canaan, he went to a place that people were calling Seir. Seir is a man. He's a person. Just like Esau is Edom, and Edom later becomes the region, the name of the region. So he comes to this place, this land of Seir. This Seir was a Horite. That was his ethnicity. He was a Horite. That's what they went by. Horite was the name. And he was a prominent man, and he settled in this land, and that's where they lived. And the land became named Seir. Now these are, verse 20, these are the sons of Seir the Horite. So when Esau gets there, this guy, Seir, who's prominent there, he's got all these sons. These are the inhabitants of the land. Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, Dishan. These are the chiefs of the Horites, the sons of Seir in the land of Edom. The sons of Lotan were Hori and Hemam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. These are the sons of... Now, Timnah is a name we've already read about. Verse 12. Look up here to verse 12. Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son. It's interesting. Eliphaz was born. They moved to Canaan. And this woman named Timnah, Lotan's sister, becomes a concubine of Eliphaz. Right? You're getting a clue now as to about how when they moved in, about how things happened. In some ways, they intermarried, but he didn't marry her as a wife. He married her as a concubine, as a servant. Right? That's the way that this was done. They were subjected in some way. It wasn't just equal partners here. These are the sons of Shobal, Alvan, Manahath, Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. These are the sons of Zibeon, Aiah, and Anah. Now that we've already mentioned another Anah at the end of verse 20. Now that Anah has a nephew named Anah, and he is the Anah who found the hot springs in the wilderness as he pastured the donkeys of Zibeon, his father. That'll come up later. This is relevant. There's a reason that's given there, I think. These are the children of Anah. This is now that Anah's uncle. Dishon and Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These are the sons of Dishon, Himdan, Eshban, Ithran, and Cheran. These are the sons of Ezer, Bilhan, Zavan, and Akan. These are the sons of Dishan, Uz, and Aran. Now there's this woman that's named in verse 25. These are the children of Anah, Dishon and Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah. Well, wouldn't you know, let's come back up to verse 2. Who was one of the people that Esau took as a wife? Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Hivites and Horites, there's an overlap of those people, just so you know. Like one's a larger category and one's a narrower category. So this woman that's mentioned here, evidently before Esau ever went to Seir, while he was still in Canaan, one of the women that he married was from there. One of these guys' daughters, one of the chiefs. And he married her. So no wonder of all the places where he decided to go somewhere, it's not unusual that he would have gone back to where her family was from. He'd been there before, he knew people there, and he moved there. Took him and his family there instead of where they had been. After all, he was a traveling nomad through the land, right? It's hard to find a place that would be welcoming. Well, if you've already got a family connection, go there. They'll let you settle. And they did. How many times have we read in Genesis about one group and another group saying, our sons and our daughters will intermarry. And you'll have what we have, and we'll have what you have, and it'll just work out. It'll be fine. You'll be accepted. And evidently Esau had done that. He had married this woman, and when he decided to leave Canaan, he went to the place where her family was from, where her father was a chief. He went there. And then once he got there, he and his sons began to really take over in a way. Now, verse 29. These are chiefs from the Horites in the land of Seir. So these are not descendants of Esau we're talking about. We're talking about among the Horites who were already there. These were their chiefs. These are the chiefs of the Horites. The chiefs Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. These are the chiefs of the Horites, chief by chief in the land of Seir. Okay. Now another section. Now we're looking at early kings in the land of Edom. and then chiefs of Esau. Now, I think there is a chronological break here. I think this is the way this works in my mind. So the first section, verses 9 through 15, is sort of, okay, Esau comes to Edom, now, or to the land of Seir. Now that he's there, what happens of his family? Well, these are the generations, this is how it goes, and these are the ones that become prominent and chiefs among his family. Now, second section. When he got there, there was already an established group of people, the sons of Seir. And among those people, these are the prominent descendants, and then these are the chiefs. Now you know that. Now, once Esau had come, and there had been some intermingling of the people, and things had begun to change, the political landscape completely changed. After all, Edom is Esau, not Seir, not the Horites. It's all about Esau and Edom and his people. So what happened? Well, it wasn't long, and there were some kings that reigned. And these are the kings who reigned in the land that we know as Edom. And this happened even before any king reigned over the Israelites. So our time period that we're dealing with is after Esau comes to the land of Seir and becomes prominent and begins to kind of take over, but also before there are any kings in Israel. This is kind of during the time that Israel's in slavery in Egypt, in the period of the judges. We're talking about this time period. Hundreds and hundreds of years. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. Verse 32. Bela, the son of Beor. Remember that. There's another person you might know in the Bible with a similar name, also the son of Beor. This is Bela. You might know a familiar guy named Balaam, son of Beor, who lived in the same region. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over Israelites. Bela, son of Beor, reigned in Edom, the name of his city being Dinhabah. Bela died, and Jobab, the son of Zerah of Basra, reigned in his place. Jobab died, and Husham of the land of the Temanites reigned in his place. Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the country of Moab, reigned in his place, the name of his city being Avith. Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah reigned in his place. Samlah died, and Shaul of Rehoboth on the Euphrates reigned in his place. Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan, the son of Achor, reigned in his place. Baal-Hanan, the son of Achor, died, and Hadar reigned in his place, the name of his city being Pau. His wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, daughter of Mezahab. Let's stop there for a second. There are some really interesting things that happen in this section. First of all, there's no dynasties. There's no dynasties. What do I mean by a dynasty? Like one man is king, and then his son becomes king, and then his son becomes king, and then his son becomes king. That didn't happen. This is very strange for this time. This guy in this city is king, and then he dies, and then this other guy in this other city is king. And then he dies, and this other guy in that city is king, and then this other guy up here, he becomes king after this guy dies, and then that guy dies, and then there's another person. This is strange. Like even in Israel, in Judah, you had David was king, and it was always his descendants. His son, and 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 his son. But in Israel, it was this guy, and then his son, and then they were killed. Somebody else took over the throne. And there was that guy and his son, and his son, and his son, and then they were killed. And then there's this guy, and then he was killed. He didn't get to pass on to his son. And that guy, his son, his son, his son, his son, and then they were killed. This is the way kingdoms work. Kings pass the kingdom on to their sons, to their family, not to their neighbors or their rivals. They try not to do that. So it's very strange and has led some people to wonder if this is something of a democracy in Edom. Like it's strange that this guy is king and he seems to be kind of king for life and then he dies. And it's just not automatic that we're going to look to that town or that family to be ruler. There's another guy. And has led other people to wonder, because this word here that's used for kings, it's the only time it's used. It's used uniquely for them. The other places it's used, it's always this word is used to describe their leaders. So is it something unique to their politics of their people in that region? And is it in some ways similar to the judges? Right? We have, the people of Israel had the judges, and one would rise up and he would kind of rule over Israel, and then he would die. And people wouldn't say, his sons. And that kind of happened a little bit, but generally it was just he died, and then what happened? we were without a judge, and people overran us, so we needed a deliverer. And then God raised up another guy, and this guy, now he's in charge. And then this one's in charge. And it just from different cities and towns and places, it wasn't really a royal dynasty or anything like that. It wasn't even royalty. These were just guys who rose up and delivered the people and judged the nation. Became deliverers and judges for the people. Rulers in that sense. Rulers because they had earned the respect and the following of the people. And it could be something like that here, but it's a different word. And it's translated king usually for a reason, so it seems to be more than that. And there are some texts we'll look at, or at least one text we'll look at here in a little bit when we look at some of these questions on the back. So now then, so those are these early kings in the land of Edom. I say early kings because they had kings even after David ruled and conquered them. There were times in their history where they had rulers and kings. So these are just their early kings. This is before any king was in Israel. Now then, verse 40, we're going to look at some chiefs of Esau according to their clan and their dwelling places. Now this is also different than anything we've read before. We haven't read a list that's titled this way. These are the names of the chiefs of Esau. We already read verse 15, these are the chiefs of the sons of Esau. These are the names of the chiefs of Esau. I feel like we're getting ready to have a big repeat, right? It should be all like the same names. But this says, according to their clans and their dwelling places. So I'm set up for, okay, this might be a little bit different list. And it's vastly different. There's only 2 names that are repeated. Every other name is different. The chiefs, Timnah, which, by the way, is a concubine of Eliphaz. How is Timnah a chief? Well, it's probably geographical. Then Alvah and Jetheth. Oholibamah, that was one of Esau's wives. That was far from a son or a chief. Then Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Teman, Mibzar. So there's two women that are repeated and 2 that were not listed as chiefs before, they were in the genealogy. And there's 2 men, Kenaz and Timon, who are specifically repeated. They were chiefs, and now they're chiefs of Esau according to their clans and dwelling places. Verse 43, Magdiel and Aram. These are the chiefs of Edom, that is Esau, the father of Edom, according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. It's a different kind of a list. Now, what do we do with all this? Well, part of this, I think, helps you read the rest of the genealogies in the Bible. And what I mean is this. When you read a genealogy in some other book of the Bible, and it says something like, and these are the sons of so-and-so according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession, you should know I may not be dealing with just a list of this person's sons in a genealogical list. Because we have some of these. We have a genealogical list, we have a chiefs list, we have a chiefs according to clans and dwelling places list. And they're all different. And I would just say, it's not like, the author's not lying to us and making things up. If he'd have written this and it was false to his contemporaries, he'd have been found out in a moment. These lists are all accurate in their own way. They have different agendas and different goals. If I were to say, tell me what are the cities in Missouri? And if you said St. Louis and Kansas City, you wouldn't be wrong. Unless I was asking that question in a different way. Could you tell me, when I asked it, I meant like all the places that technically qualify as a city. And I don't know, there is a technical definition of that population, what it becomes a township to a city. In which case the list would be much longer. Right? Or if I just meant, places where people have it, like, we've got Monroe City, which is not technically a city, but we call it Monroe City. Like things like that size and above. The list would be much longer. What's your purpose in, I will answer you differently according to the nature of what our understanding is, of what my list is trying to do. And all of these lists are doing different things. And so when you come to these places in the Bible where it says, this is the genealogy of so-and-so, that's fine. But if it says, according to such and such and such and such, now you know, hey, this might not match what I'm thinking of a straight genealogy. This is more of a political answer, or it's more of a, it has its own agenda. It's not just a straight list. Many times I think people who read the Bible create difficulties for themselves when they don't acknowledge that these people have a practice of looking at genealogies, which they kept careful record of, and selecting names from them and arranging them in such a way to answer honestly a specific question and to deal with a specific issue. They were giving you the information you needed to answer this. And so if we were a contemporary here, we would, when someone said, these are the chiefs from Esau, the descendants of the land of Edom, we would read that chief list and think, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that's how those guys were related. That's interesting. That's good to know. I'm thankful, glad I know that. And then it would come up, now these are the chiefs of Esau according to their clans and their locations. And you wouldn't say, like we do, didn't you just tell me that? You would say, oh, okay, well, now tell me this new information. It would be very different. You see, and so they would understand it that way. And we don't, because we're so distant from them in terms of our culture, we don't look at these lists in the same way. Now then, I am including in this section, Genesis 37, verse 1, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. And then verse 2 begins the next section. These are the generations of Jacob. Now, I include it for a couple of reasons, and that will become apparent as we flip over and go to the back and consider some things here. So let's just look at these questions. When was this inserted into Moses' book? Well, I have to acknowledge the distant possibility that Moses put it in because of what's written in Numbers 20. You could turn there with me if you like, but that's where I'm going to go. Numbers 20, verse 14. The people of Israel are outside the promised land. They're kind of making their way there, and they come to the outskirts of the region of Edom. Verse 14, Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. So at that time, there are kings in Edom. So it could be that Moses knew of these kings and he wrote the list down, and that's just what it is. It's possible. I don't mean to rule that out, but consider the way that Genesis chapter 36, 1 through 8 flows so well into 37:1. Let's look at that. Let's just look at verse 6 through 8, and then we'll jump down to 37:1. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, the livestock, all his beasts, and all the property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan. He went into a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together. The land of their sojournings could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. It just kind of fits really well. I mean, this is Esau and his descendants, and this is where he went. And he did that and settled there, while Jacob was just there in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. That's where he settled. And now then, okay, what became of Jacob? That seems to fit really well. And you'll notice in these notes I say, consider also the extreme similarities between the way that Ishmael was treated and the way that Esau are treated in terms of genealogy. We just read Genesis chapter 36, kind of 1 through 8 and 7:1. This big, long insertion of Esau's genealogy in verses 9 through 43 seems a bit out of place when you consider the way Ishmael was treated. Remember, Ishmael was also a son, first generation son, this time of Abraham. He was not chosen. But let's look at that in Genesis chapter 25. You have the death of Abraham. And then in verse 12, these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abdeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Timah, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names. Now what? By their villages and by their encampments. 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. So it's so much more concise, kind of gives the sons and says these were the main ones. and this is where they settled, and then this is how long he lived and he died. Moving on. And it seems like to have this big, long insertion in Genesis chapter 36, seems like it was probably added maybe later. Likely, I think, an editor after the reign of Saul or David. Why do I say that? Because of verse 31, Genesis 36:31. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. It seems like whoever's writing this knows that this is the end of the list, because now we've got kings in Israel. This is the list of people who were kings before then. So you would have to know when they had a king. Now, the first king was Saul, and the second king was David. The first king, Saul, it could be that we should maybe read this before any king reigned over the Israelites. But the way I understand it, and some commentators take this view, that reigned over the Israelites isn't really the best way, but rather reigned for the Israelites, before any king reigned for the Israelites. In which case you could take it one of two ways. It could be before any king reigned for the Israelites, meaning before Saul ever became king and reigned for them, was their king for them. Or it could mean these were the kings that existed and ruled in Edom before anyone was ruling in Edom for the Israelites, before anyone ruled for Israel. In which case you might think, oh, well, it's a long ways distant. It's a big difference of time. No, it's just the next king. David conquered in Edom, and he ruled and subjugated those people. So either way, we're talking about at most Saul, maybe David. So we could say at least surely by the time of Solomon, this is written. You know, they've got some historical perspective on it a little bit. So it at least seems to be by then. David conquers Edom in 2 Samuel 8, 13 through 14. And let's just look at that because it will be instructive for us with a question that comes up later. 2 Samuel 8, verses 13 and 14, read this way. And David made a name for himself when he returned from striking down 18,000, right, this is David and his men, 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. Then he put garrisons in Edom. He didn't just defeat them. He put his men into Edom, into the land. Throughout all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants. And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. So he subjugated the people. He defeated 18,000 of them, then he sent men in all throughout the land, and they became, as a country, David's servants. The elder shall serve the younger, right? It happened, for sure. Now, other ways to consider how this may have, when this was inserted into Moses' book, timeline references. Eliphaz, the son of Esau, is likely the one mentioned in Job. Likely the one mentioned in Job. That Eliphaz is called the Temanite. Well, here Eliphaz has a son named Teman. Seems like that's the guy. So, I mean, if you want to know who this guy was, he's probably mentioned for you right here. He was Esau's firstborn son, probably. Job's buddy. It's amazing. Now, I can't prove it, but I mean, we know Job was written around this time, or that the events took place around this time, and here we are, and it's Eliphaz from Teman. This Eliphaz has a son named Teman. I mean, it's either him or it's like maybe Eliphaz has a son named Teman, and Teman names his son Eliphaz, and it's that guy? I don't know. But we're close to the mark here. We're really close. It might be the same guy. Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 12. Another hint at the timing of things. Deuteronomy 2:12. Moses can write in his day, the Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place, as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them. Wait a second. Now think of this. This bit, as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them, that is definitely inserted after Moses' time. The people hadn't dispossessed their people yet. But we're reading here about the Horites living in the land of Seir formerly, but the people of Esau dispossessed them. So someone after the people of Israel had come into the promised land, some scribe is looking through Deuteronomy and saying, we ought to explain this here. This would be a help to the people. And one of the things they say is, the Horites also lived in Seir formerly, but the people of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place. That act of dispossessing them, destroying them, settling them in their place is, I think, explained mostly in these genealogies which you've just been reading. Kind of how that happened and the nature of that and the peoples that were left and how the way they were all intermingled. So that's a big part of things. Now, verse 39. Genesis chapter 36, verse 39 reads as follows. Ben-Hanan, the son of Achbor, died, and Hadar reigned in his place, the name of his city being Pau, his wife, and then he goes about his wife's name. Now, these names, I think you know, surely you do, and this is just another example of it, how sometimes biblical names have different spellings in one chapter to another. Sometimes there's an abbreviated version or a version it's the same name, but it's a different way of spelling it. This happens. And I think we have an example of that here. If you'll turn with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 1. 1 Chronicles 1. Get there. 1 Chronicles chapter 1. Verse 50. Baal-Hanan died, and Hadad reigned in his place. Right? And Hadad reigned in his place. Right? Baal-Hanan the son of Achbor died, and Hadar reigned in his place. Well, this says now Hadan reigned in his place. The name of his city, this is from Genesis 36, the name of his city being Pau. Well, in 1 Chronicles, the name of his city being Pai. It's spelled a little different, P-A-I instead of P-A-U. Right? And his wife's name was, and then it mentions his name, Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, right? The daughter of Mezahab, and that's all the same. So all that's similar. But in terms of the timing of it, in Genesis 36, when this was first written, it just ends with Hadad and that he had died, or Hadad and that he was the king. Right? In verse 39, he was the early king of Edom. But then in 1 Chronicles, which written far later, it adds another bit onto the end of this. And Hadad died. And he died. But nothing was mentioned about that in Genesis 36. It doesn't say that Hadad died. But now, much later, hundreds of years later, we're able to say, oh, and by the way, that guy, he did die. Just meaning to say that it's possible that Hadad was still alive when this was written. In which case, Hadad would have to be like a contemporary of David or somebody like that. He had to be nearby in that time. Right? It seems like that would be the case. Well, there is a Hadad that's talked about from this land in 1 Kings. Let's turn there. 1 Kings chapter 11. Verses 14 through 22. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. This could be the guy. For he was of the royal house of Edom. You mean he was a king or prince? Something like, yeah. Here he is. For when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. Whew, that's rough. But Hadad, how did he live? He fled to Egypt, together with certain Edomites of his father's servants, Hadad still being a little child. They set out from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran, and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Taphanes the queen. And the sister of Taphanes bore him Genubath his son, whom Taphanes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, that David had died, that is, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, let me depart, that I may go to my own country. But Pharaoh said to him, what if you lack with me, that you are now seeking to go to your own country? And he said to him, only let me depart. And he leaves. So this was one of the adversaries that came against Solomon. was this Hadad. So in terms of the timing, again, it seems like this list goes all the way from, this genealogy extends all the way from Esau himself when he moves to Edom, all the way to when David conquers Edom. He rules in Edom for Israel. Hadad flees. He's still alive. He was a king, but he hasn't died yet. And this list is written. And it's left there. And all the other kings are dead, but he's not dead. And then later in 1 Chronicles it says, oh yeah, and that Hadad, he died. Because it's got the historical perspective on it now. So I think the time when it was written is probably David's lifetime, or at least before he comes against Solomon. Now there's another thing, this son of Beor. Verse 32, we have in Genesis 36:32. Bela the son of Beor reigned in Edom, the name of his city being Dinhaba. Now these kings, all the way from this guy who's mentioned first, kings in Edom, all the way to Hadad. If this is Balaam the son of Beor, the same guy, then we would have essentially, we have chiefs and all these other developments, but we would have kings from the time when Israel was in the Promised Land and had a dealing with one of those kings. And from then on, they would have had dealings with the kings of Edom until this last one, until David conquered, and the last one fled for his life. So you'd have a record of the prominent kings in Edom from the time of the wilderness wanderings until the time that David overthrew them. That would be the purpose of the niche of that record of those kings. So that's my own take on it. I think some of that is a little bit of guesswork, like if it's the same son of Beor, if it's the same Balaam. If Balaam and Bela is the same guy, both are mentioned as a son of Beor. They're both in the same region. They both are prominent and sought after by other rulers in the land. So it may be the same guy. Certainly can't prove it. So that's all of that. Now, the rest of this will go pretty quick. Some surprising problems that we come to in the list and some suggestions for answering them. First of all, number one, so much repetition. We've already discussed this at length, but there's different lists, even seemingly conflicting lists. One saying these are the chiefs, another these are the chiefs, another one, these are the sons, and then these are the chiefs, and it's all the sons except there's new names. Seem to contradict. That's really strange. I just would say again, these lists would not be understood as contradictory by the original authors or the original cultures. Each list was accurate in its own right, recording information for legitimate purposes. The real issue here is what feels like extreme thoroughness. Right? It seems like the kind of issue is, why do we have so much? Why so many different angles on all of this? But Genesis is not alone in any of this, as the same list is repeated again by the chronicler in 1 Chronicles chapter 1. It's not exact. Basically, he does some abbreviating. He doesn't do much repeating of names, but he lists it the same way according to chiefs, according to the rulers of Seir, according to the chiefs, according to their places where they settle. All of that is listed. Those same multiple lists are given. And it's strange because that the chronicler would do that. Why does he think it's so important? Because you know how many times the chronicler will say, and if you've read through those books, I've counted up about 30 plus times between 1st and 2nd Chronicles that he says, as for these other things that you might be interested, they're written in this other book and you could go read them. Why doesn't he just tell us, as for the descendants of Esau, Moses wrote about them and you can read them there. But he repeats them, like obviously it's important to them. It may not be important to you or to me, but it is important to them to have this list spelled out in this way. I mean, as much as we just read about it in Genesis 36 and how boring those names are, the chronicler repeats them all for you in case you didn't get it the first time, because you need to get it. It's just crazy. So the repetition is there. The Bible intends for it to be there. It wants the people of Israel to understand this about the people of Esau. Now, another problem. The chiefs of Esau that are listed in 15 through 19 and 40 through 43 are not even close. I mentioned that already. Only 2 names repeat. And I think, again, there are just different purposes here. Possibly 15 through 19 is genealogical, whereas 40 through 43 is more geographical, because we know some of the names, specifically we know, are place names. Just archaeologically we know that. And then 2 of the names are women who weren't even mentioned as chiefs before. So it's probably like regions. Now, I kind of have a thought here. Perhaps these are administrative districts according to their clans and dwelling places under David. Right? David conquers all these kings, and then after that it says, now these are the chiefs of the people of the Edomites in the land according to their chiefs and according to their clans and their dwelling places. If David went in, conquered, and sent garrisons all throughout the land to make the people his servants and to collect tax and duty and things like that, it could be that these were administrative regions in that sense. Like they were set up and given these names in that way. Very possible where that list would come from. And then also perhaps the list of chiefs is not historical, but current. In other words, you had a list of chiefs in 15 through 19. That was the old list. These are the chiefs, the prominent clans, and they all became named by these men. But then later when David conquered, what's the situation there? Well, now the chiefs, according to their dwelling places and their clans, these are the names now. Things do change over time. I mean, after all, this was the land of Seir, now the land of Edom. We're talking about a man named Seir, the Horite. I'm talking about a person named Esau who goes by Edom, who now is a land called Seir, is now called Edom. I mean, all these names are changing, so it's very possible this sort of thing happens too, that it's just a chronological difference, a difference in historical time. These are the clans now. 500 years later, these are the clans and their names, according to their dwelling places. That's another possibility as to why these are different. Last thing on this to consider. This will take a little bit of time, and then the rest will really go quick. The wives of Esau do not match the list given in Genesis 26 and 28. This is interesting. So in Genesis 36, we have 3 wives. You could turn over and just look at that, but I'm going to turn to these other passages in Genesis 26. So I'll say this essentially. The names of their fathers, one of them is a different name of the father, and then this name Basemath goes from one woman to another woman. It's just bizarre. So in Genesis 26, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And then in Genesis 28, we read, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Now, in Genesis 36, it's very different. Judith of Beeri the Hittite becomes someone different, becomes Aholibama of Anah. And that's mentioned also again in 1 Chronicles 1:40. There's this where where it's again Anah. Now, just consider her for a second. This Anah that's mentioned, you remember, let's look at verse 24. These are the sons of Zibeon, Aiah and Anah. He is the Anah who found the hot springs in the wilderness, and he pastured the donkeys of Zibeon his father. Beeri as a name, so his name is Anah, and this guy found these springs in the wilderness. Beeri means something like man of the well. And if we're having a problem with the guy's name, who one place it's Beeri and another it's Anah, it's hard to put those together. But if we know about this, the same woman has contributed to these 2 men. But if we know about this Anah, that he found these springs and these wells out in the wilderness, well, he may well have got a new name, namely Beeri. Well man, right? Man of the well. And that's him. So that name can come across there. And so that's an answer for that. But her name also changes from Judith, meaning praised one, to Aholibama, meaning tall and stately, or tent height. Well, what do I say about that? People change their names all the time. She became maybe noble in appearance or tall. Maybe she performed some noble thing to give her preeminence. None of these things would be unusual for us we find in the Bible where other stories like this are told. There's this woman named Basemath. She's said to be the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Well, later in Genesis 36, it's Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite. Her name was the perfumed one, or the fragrant woman. Now her name changes to the adorned one. Well, something we know about her, she had the most sons. She had the most sons for Esau. Perhaps the reason she got her name changed to the adorned one was because it was very common in those times. A woman's honor was considered by how many sons she had. If she had the most sons, she was the one who was adorned. She changed her name perhaps, or she took that name more frequently. Maybe it was a name of affection. Then Mahalath, which means the musical one, takes the name Basemath, which means perfumed one. Is she fragrant in the sense of a pleasing aroma? Is she just pleasant to be around? Or maybe she just does smell nice. I don't know. Why did the other Basemath, have that name before? Well, it changes. So these things change. It's not important that we have a definitive answer on these, but we want to have at least a possible explanation for that. And so those are there. Those are then just some problems that we're surprised with in these lists and some suggestions for answering them. Now then, just to wrap up here. Why so much information included for us here? Who cares? Why is this important for anybody? Let's give some reasons here. First, Moses included his original list of the sons of Esau because these had become chiefs and local leaders and kings long before Israel had any such thing. He was recording the fulfillment of God's word that Esau would become a nation. He was recording the lineage of Edom. So far as he had access to records at the time, Moses was doing this because the people should know at least a bit of God's faithfulness to his word among them, and also they should have an authoritative record of who these neighbors around them in Canaan were. And he could provide that. Second, the additional details in verses 9 through 43 become important when you consider that Israel had further dealings with these nations. It wasn't like some of these other people, they go in, they destroy them, and that was it. All through Israel's history, they're constantly dealing with the Edomites. In fact, even in the New Testament, these same people are called Idumeans. They're still around, right? They're forever there and in their history dealing with them. So just to say that even after they had conquered them, they would then, once they conquered them, have access to all sorts of records of the Edomites, right? Once David comes in with all his men, all the written records of the Edomites and their genealogies are all available to the Jews. The known history of the Edomites, together with their genealogical records, would have been thorough. And this, what we have here in Genesis 36, sort of a bare bones outline of things, tells the history of Edom becoming a powerful people and adds the details to the materials of Deuteronomy 2:12, where it just says they went in and subdued them and conquered them and ruled the land. Give us some details. This text does that. It demonstrates that when Edom moved into the land of Seir, they didn't just overrun the people of Seir, but they ruled them and intermarried with them once they subjugated them. They put them under their feet such that though there are these several ethnic groups in Edom, even so dominant is Esau and his descendants that Enoch is Edom. The land becomes, it's all about Enoch and his family. The land becomes the land of Edom. The land bears his name, and all the inhabitants are reckoned as coming from him, except for Amalek. Third reason why we might have all this. This would then therefore also include the state of things when David conquered the people of Edom and put them into subjection. It would be a list of the major political developments of Edom from Esau all the way through to Solomon or David. It's not a thorough history of record of everything that ever happened there, but it would explain well enough to anyone who had regular dealings with the Edomites just how they were situated, what their history was, how the different groups were related. Edom and Israel would have dealings all throughout the Old Testament, and so there was a ready reference. Last point on this. Remember, Esau and Jacob appear to have ended their days amicably or on friendly terms. And while Israel would rule over them, and while there would come to be great tensions between them, God had established Edom as a nation unto itself. In seeing the history of that, being able to look at that and read it in this chapter, and the kings which came from Abraham, even through Esau, would be a good thing to know that there was an accurate record about, that you could trust, you could get to and find. if you were an Israelite. Now, last section here. What lessons might we draw from the details themselves in order to help us live the Christian life? The details of chapter 36. What's in the text that's going to help me live the Christian life? Well, the first thing I'll say is this. It's an example of God fulfilling His word in every respect. God said Esau would become a nation, and he did. He went to a place that was already inhabited and had chiefs, rulers in the place. It didn't matter. Esau dominated there. His sons became chiefs, and his descendants became kings. Esau became a nation. Yes, Esau did divide from the promised line, just as God said, 2 nations would be divided. And Esau took off and he left. Esau also would be made to serve his brother Jacob and would break the yoke of his brother Jacob. So remember that was told. It was told Esau was going to be under the yoke of his brother, but when he grew restless, he would break it off, and he did. And he went out there and he grew restless, and he went out to Seir, and he lived by the sword. But eventually, despite the long freedom from Jacob, he would eventually be brought again to serve his brother when David conquered. The older shall serve the younger. Well, that's one thing. Just to draw encouragement, God fulfilled His word. It was so unlikely that Esau was going to be this, and yet he was. And then how unlikely that the people of Israel would come, the slaves in Egypt would come up and would rule over the Edomites? It happened. Everything happened just as God said it would. And the second thing is just to take from this and to read this as encouragement that God's promises to Israel came true perfectly, even though it took a long time. The people of Edom seemed to run ahead in their success without the help of God. If you were to look while Israel was in slavery and say, who's God with? I mean, it sure seems like Edom's got the better end of the deal here. I mean, they've got a good situation. They've got kings and rulers and land and wisdom and so much. And Israel is they're down there building for Egypt. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. It takes so long. But in the end, God comes through. But it looks like, and this is just take it as encouragement in your own life, you look out at different times, you look at those who don't know God, they're not walking with God, you see the life they live. Sometimes those people have it very easy. Sometimes their life is very hard. The way of the wicked is hard. Sometimes people who set their gaze on the things and the riches of the world get it. God gives them the desires of their heart, and they are full with the fatness of the land, while the people of God suffer and do without. And you think, and you have this over and over in the Psalms. Some psalmist says, what good is it to serve God at all? Why do we even bother? Look at these people, they have everything. And then I realized, right, what their end is, how things turn out in the end, and that God's true to His word, and now my whole perspective's changed. Well, here's an example of that in living historical reality. They had it great until they didn't anymore because they rejected God. Esau walked out of the promise. He didn't want anything to do with it. Sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. While Edom's descendants were conquering and were leading chiefs and famous in their days, Israel's descendants were slaves in Egypt. But that's not how it ends. Just take encouragement from that. So, there is a point to these passages. As difficult as they are, as easy it is to get bogged down. I mean, we could have ferreted out all these names and the different things and could have spent months doing this and would not have exhausted the different tensions that are in the text and issues that it raises. It's not going to be helpful for us. But I feel like I needed to give you a sense of what's happening in this text and the way these lists function and play off of one another so that you can understand it at all, not just be confused. And then once we understand that some of what's going on here, now we can get a sense of what we're supposed to take from the passage. So hopefully you're able to do that. I think the text has a real purpose for the people of Israel because they live with Edom and Edomites as their neighbors all through their history. So there's a big part of things that's relevant to them. We see how these lists came about historically. And then practically for us, it's an encouragement to see just because the way things are is not the way they're always going to be, right? Whatever the state of things are at any given time, things change. What we see throughout all of it, whatever the history may be at any one time, whatever the state of things, by the time it's over, God's fulfilled His promise. He's done what He said He would do. What He said would come to pass has come to pass. things are what they said he would. Things are what he said they would be, and that's wonderfully encouraging. So, take encouragement from that. Any questions or comments on this? I'm literally to ask for questions because